Masechet Rosh Hashana Daf Yudalid 14. Three main topics. First, the source that the deadline for vegetables to decide what their fiscal year is cutting. What is the source for this law? And related to this is also the source that for fruits, it is at the time that the fruit emerges. We're going to see two opinions about this and then see the difference between those two opinions because they're very similar. And then we're going to see why is the new fruit for trees in Shevat, either the first of Shevat for Bet Shammai or Tu B'Shvat, according to Bet Hillel. What's the reason for that? And then we're going to see a long discussion on a fascinating story about Rabbi Akiva's etrog, where he was especially stringent to follow both Bet Hillel and both Bet Shammai. Bet Hillel and Bet Shammai, apparently. All right, so we begin with the first one, the deadline for vegetables, and the source for that. Tanya, Rabbi Yosef HaGalili Omer, Ve'ospecha migornecha u'migvecha. So this pasuk is referring to the threshing floor that's grain and wine press that's grapes. So for grain and grapes, we know that the cutoff time for them is when it reaches 1/3 growth. So that's especially for them and anything like it. So what's the characteristic of them that gives them that reason? With grain, most of its sustenance, its rain comes from the previous year, before Rosh Hashana. It needs to get its water before that. And then once it has that water, then it can continue and do its thing. So in other words, the first third of growth is what's really important for it. And the rest goes on autopilot. And that's why it follows the previous year as long as it already reached 1/3 of its growth. The rest of its growth doesn't depend on the rain that will come in the next year. So too, so to anything like that, will have the same law. And for this would come to include fruit on trees that also it needs to get water at the beginning, but then once it gets its water, it goes into the sap, and that will take care of the fruit on its own. So it therefore follows the time when it emerges. Once it emerges, that's it, even though it's going to stay on the tree for a long time after. But that staying on the tree for a while after to fully ripen doesn't depend on any rain that falls after that. So it doesn't matter. So that's why the cutoff time is at that point. And this excludes vegetables, because vegetables need water all the time. They need water all the way up until the end. They depend on the ground that they are in. And therefore, the cutoff time is when they are actually cut from the ground. We don't say that it's a third or at some point in the middle and then they go on autopilot. Vegetables never go on autopilot. So if they're cut after Rosh Hashanah, they needed that rain from after Rosh Hashanah. They're a product of the post Rosh Hashanah, and they go by that next year. So that's still the opinion of Rabbi Yosef HaGalili, who's making it dependent on the rain before or the rain after. Rabbi Akiva has a similar statement. It's just that he talks about irrigation rather than rain. Rabbi Akiva Omer, "Be'ospecha migornecha mikbecha," same pasuk. Ma goren v'yekim yuchadin shegidelin al rov mayim. Rov mayim, most water. That refers to rain as opposed to irrigation. So grain and grapes, they depend on rain only. And so once they have that rain, they're good, and they don't need any further irrigation. So too, that would include trees that also just need rain. You don't have to go and specially irrigate trees. Vegetables, however, require extra water. You have to irrigate them, and therefore you're irrigating them all the way up until the end. And so it's only when you cut them, that's when they are ready. That's the important time period. Whereas the others, since they don't need irrigation, and once they get most of their water from the previous year and those rains, so they once they get most of their growth from the rain of the previous year, that's it. So we don't care about the future growth, the rest of the 2/3, unlike vegetables. where you have to keep irrigating them. Okay, so you see they're very similar. This is Rabbi Yosef is emphasizing the rain that will come, Rabbi Akiva, the irrigation that will come during that year. So is there any case in which they actually would disagree with each other? So we say, yeah, this is the following case. My benaihu, so this these two, this seedless onion and the Egyptian beans again, that would be different. Ditnan besalim asarisinu ful hamisri shemana mehem mayim sheloshim yom lifnei Rosh Hashana. So these two species, if you remove water from them, now removing water from them, you can't remove the rain, but you can remove the irrigation. Why would you do that? You want to? You're trying to conduct some experiment and make them suffer. The reason you do that is because you want them not to eat, but for seeds. So you want them to grow and kind of stop short. And that's why you don't give them any water 30 days before Rosh Hashanah. Remember, that's an important time, because if it's a Shavuot year coming in, already 30 days before is considered part of that year. So if you're not giving them any rain at all, any water at all during that time, then then they're considered last year's crops. And if that year was if it was a Maaser Sheni or Maaser Ani year, it would go by the previous one. And if it's the sixth year, then it would be permitted. So it goes by the previous year. V'im lav, but if you did give them rain within that 30 days, asurin b'shevi'it u'mit'aserin l'shana haba'ah, then they would be considered the next year's crop. And if the next year was Shavuot, it would be prohibited. And if the year of Maaser would go by the following year. So why? Because here they are irrigated. So once they're irrigated close to into the next year, so then they're considered part of the next year. So you see that these are different from most vegetables. And the reason why they're different is because these things you're removing irrigation. If you remove the irrigation, then they have a different law. So you see, it depends on irrigation, and that is Rabbi Akiva's opinion. And so this Mishnah would only follow Rabbi Akiva and not Rabbi Yosef HaGalili. Okay, what I just said is only one interpretation of two. There are other Rishonim that interpret this to say that's only Rabbi Yosef HaGalili and not the other way around. So a lot of factors, but the point is that would be a difference one way or the other. All right, and now we get to the second item, which is why is the new year for trees? Why are trees so different from everything else? That's in Tishrei. Be'echad Bishvat, Rosh Hashana La'ilan for Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel's 2 Bishvat, and that's the fiscal year for trees. Whatever emerges as a fruit before this date will be you'll give Ma'aseh for the previous year, and whatever emerges after that date, the 1st or the 15th, the fruit emerges, you'll go to the next year. So my tama. What's the reason? The reason is because already most of the rain fell, and the winter is still a long way. There's still a long way till for winter. Now, the second line seems to be strange. Maika Amad, if there's still a long time towards winter, then actually you should wait later, if anything. So it means even though, that's you have to add an even though here. So the reason is because by that point, by the 1st of Shvat or 2 Bishvat, already most of the rain has come. Even though the winter is still going to last, the winter season is still going to last until Nisan. So you don't have to wait till Nisan because most of the rain came and the trees got their water, and that's it. Now, anything else that happens is already in the tree. And so that's the cutoff date. Okay, good. So now we know that. And now we get to the third part, which is this fascinating story. Tenor Rabbanan Ma'aseh. Rabbi Akiva sheliket etrog be'achad bishvat v'nahag bo shenei isurin. Rabbi Akiva, he plucked an etrog on the 1st of Shvat. So that's important that he's following the time when he plucked it. And it was the 1st of Shvat, which is the new year for Bet Shammai. V'nahag bo shnei isurin, and he took maaser twice. assuming it was a year, let's say between the second or fifth year, going into the third and sixth year. So then the cutoff date would make a difference in which kind of ma'aseh you bring. If it's the second date, if it's the second year, it will be ma'aseh sheni. If it's the third year, it will be ma'aseh ani. And he did both. Why? He wanted to be stringent for both. If it follows Bet Shammai, then he's doing it after Rosh Chodesh Shevat. So that's already the next year. That's the third year. But according to Bet Hillel, it's Tu Bishvat, and he plucked it before Tu Bishvat. So then that would make it the second year. And so he wanted to be Machmir for both. And so that's why he gave, besides Maaseh Rishon, which you have to give every year, he gave Maaseh Sheni and also Maaseh Ani. Okay, this is a very interesting story because it's surprising that he's following Bet Shammai at all. Apparently, this story happened before it became mainstream that everyone has to follow Bet Hillel. People were still following Bet Shammai, and we can show that from other stories of Tanaim who sometimes put themselves in danger or wanted to make a point and followed Bet Shammai. So he did both. All right. So now that's one interpretation of Rabbi Akiva's actions in Tanakh Kama. However, Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda, last generation Tana, he has a different explanation. He says, Omer, lo minag Bet Shammai or Bet Hillel nahag ba. No, the reason he did two of them isn't because he was following both Bet Hillel Bet Shammai. He was in conflict about a different machloket altogether. Ela minhag Rabban Gamliel v'Rabbi Eliezer nahag ba. There's another machloket between these two Tanaim. And then he wasn't sure what the halacha is, so he followed both of them. Now, what is their machloket? Okay, here we're going to learn it in the next Mishnah. Titnan. Etrog shaveli lan bishlosha derachim ulyarak bederech echad. Etrog is a special, unusual fruit, and it is like other fruit in three ways. But according to Tanakh Kama, it's like vegetables in one way. Shaveli lan bishlosha derachim deorla uverebai. So it's like a tree in that if you plant an etrog tree, the first 3 years it's orla, you can't use it at all. The fourth year is revai, and you have to take it to Jerusalem. That's the same. And also ve la shevi'it, for the sabbatical year, we go by the time of the formation of the fruit, which is if you want to decide, is this permitted on sabbatical year? As long as it was formed before the sabbatical year starts, it goes by the previous year. If it wasn't formed yet, then it's going to go by the next sabbatical year. Just like all fruit, it goes by formation. However, etrog is special because it is like a vegetable. Because when it comes to maaser, is different than shevi'it. Usually it's the same cutoff for shevi'it and maaser, but not for etrog. In etrog, when you want to know what year of maaser it goes in, it will follow the time that you pick it, not the time of emergence. So you see, this is related to the story above because Rabbi Akiva, he went by the time of picking. He said he picked it on Aleph Shevat, and so if he's picking it on that day, and that's after the new year for trees, then it's going to follow the next year. However, Rabbi Eliezer says no, etrog is like fruit for all matters, and it goes by the time of emergence, not only for Shevi'it, but also for Ma'aser. And so according to Rabbi Eliezer, since they emerged before Rosh Chodesh Shevat, so then it would go by the previous year. So the previous year was second year, he would have had to bring Ma'aser Sheni. And if it's like Rabban Gamliel, like Rabban Gamliel here, who says that you follow for Ma'aser, you follow the time that it was picked. So it was picked after Rosh Chodesh Shevat, and then therefore that would be the third year following the picking. And so in fact, it's this machloket that Rabbi Akiva wasn't sure about, and that's why he took Ma'aser twice. Okay, according to this explanation, it's actually a bit more unusual because it means he was following Bet Shammai no matter what. Okay, the Gemara will discuss that. Now, mi avdinan ketre homre. First, we ask a question: are you allowed to follow two stringencies? One, you want to be stringent like both opinions. We have this is actually Tosefta. in Masechet Yevamot, and it says, "V'hatanya leolam halacha kedibre Bet Hillel." The opening statement is, you have to follow Bet Hillel. But then it says something a little contradictory. On the other hand, if you want to follow Bet Shammai, you can. If you want Bet Hillel, you can. But here's what you really can't do. If someone goes picking for leniency picking, he follows the leniencies of both schools, that's just the evil person. He doesn't care about following a true way. He's just looking to make life easier for himself. If you look for all the stringencies, I want the stringencies of every opinion. This is called a foolish person. He walks in darkness. He has no idea what he's doing because these are internally inconsistent, and so you have to be foolish to think that you're going to follow all the stringencies. There's no need for that. Rather, pick a lane. If you want to follow Bet Shammai, fine, but follow them for leniency and stringency. If you want to follow Bet Hillel, also just do so consistently. Okay, so that's the end of the Tosefta. Very interesting Tosefta because it seems to contradict. The first it says you have to follow Bet Hillel, and then it says the rest of it. How do you reconcile these two parts of it? So the Gemara itself in the Eruvin and the Rishonim discuss this. It could be that the original layer of the Tosefta is the second part, and that's at a time when many people were doing Bet Shammai and many people were doing Bet Hillel. As long as you're consistent, it's totally fine. You could just pick one or the other, which is also what we do today. Who's your rabbi? Who's your posek? Follow that sage consistently, and you're fine. And then at a later point, when more and more people following Bet Hillel, and the rabbis decided, no, you have to follow Bet Hillel and the Bat Kol. So then the first statement was added on, appended, like, okay, you really have to follow Bet Hillel. Now, there was a time before when you could pick one or the other. Okay, so that's a way to understand it. You could also understand it all contemporaneously to say that most people are following Bet Hillel. This is not an absolute prescriptive, but you should. Everybody should do that. Okay, if you're a minority and you're following Bet Shammai, fine, but do so consistently. Okay, either way, this is a question to Rabbi Akiva, because why is Rabbi Akiva following the stringencies of both schools, right? That would violate Hakesil b'choshech holech. So what's going on here? So here's a creative answer. Rabbi Akiva gamareh istapak le ולא ידע אם בית הלל באחד בשבט אומר, אם ב15 בשבט אומר. Rabbi Akiva wanted to follow Bet Hillel and Bet Hillel only. He just wasn't sure what Bet Hillel said. He didn't have the Mishnah because he lives before the Mishnah. And he had different traditions. One tradition, like our Mishnah says, taught that Bet Hillel says Tu Bishvat is the new year for trees, but another tradition said the Rosh Chodesh Shevat is the new year for trees, and he thought what we call Bet Shammai, he thought maybe that was Bet Hillel. Since he didn't know what Bet Hillel said, so it's appropriate that he was stringent on both. It was just a matter of doubt of fact which one he said. So he was not, in fact, in violation of looking for stringencies. All right, so that could be. This answers the question according to the first understanding of what Rabbi Akiva did, that he didn't know Bet Hillel this way or the other. It doesn't actually address the second opinion that says he was following both Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer, which is also two different stringencies. And this Tosefta seems to give a blueprint, right? Maybe that's why it's keeping the rest of it, even though halacha is like Bet Hillel for other future generations of machalokot. You should also do the same thing and be consistent. Okay, but now we're going to address that second interpretation of Rabbi Akiva's story, that he wasn't in doubt regarding Bet Hillel Bet Shammai, and so we quote it again. Rabbi Yosef bar Yehuda Omer, Lo minhag Bet Shammai Bet Hillel nahag ba, ela minhag Rabban Gamliel v'Rabbi Eliezer nahag ba. He was not sure if the cutoff time for fruits are from the time that they are emerge or when they are picked, and that's why he followed both. Question on that, which I mentioned before, Bechad Bishvat, Kebet Shammai Nahagba. According to this, either way, he's using the Rosh Chodesh Shevat as the new year, which is like Bet Shammai. So why is he following Bet Shammai exactly? Amar Rabbi Chanina v'item Rabbi Chananya Hacha be'etrog shehantu perotav kodem hamisha asar di'idach shevat askinan. Okay, this answer is a stretch. Literally, we're stretching all the way back another 11 months to 12 months to go to the previous Shevat. And so we said that this etrog actually emerged, it formed its fruit before the 15th of Shevat the year before, which is Bet Hillel's new year. So therefore, since it emerged before that, and then he picked it after that Tu B'Shvat, so Rabban Gamliel would say, you go by the time of picking, so that's after, and Rabbi Eliezer says you go by the time of emergence for etrogim, like everything else, like other fruits, and that would be before that Tu B'Shvat from the year before. And now in this case, it so happens that he waited a whole 11 and a half months and actually ended up picking it after the Rosh Chodesh Shevat. But that's not significant. It's not because it was the time after Bet Shammai. And so Rabbi Akiva would have done the same thing and taken two maaseh if he had picked it the day after Tu B'Shvat. Because then also you would have had a question: do you go by the emergence, which is before Tu B'Shvat, or by the picking, which is after Tu B'Shvat? But it happens in that case. It's a real case. It happened. It happened after Achad B'Shvat. So that's why really he was following Bet Hillel the whole time. Okay, so you see how much we stretch the case to make sure to say that Rabbi Akiva did not follow Bet Shammai, although as we saw, in the times of the Tanaim, there were still many Tanaim that were following Bet Shammai, and only after it became this ironclad rule that no one could. And so we read the story that way. Okay, Ravina Amar Keroch Uvetane. So he says, no, I have a different, a better understanding, a better way to resolve this problem with Rabbi Akiva following Bet Shammai, and that is to literally combine and teach the statement. What he's saying is that this Yehuda, when he says no, they didn't lo minhag Bet Shammai Bet Hillel nahag ba, he's saying two things. Not only is it that Rabbi Akiva was not debating this machloket, also he wasn't talking about Bet Shammai at all. In other words, reread the whole story itself. That story happened on not the 1st, but the 15th of Shevat. So, in fact, not only did you misunderstand Rabbi Akiva's reasoning, according to the second reading of Rabbi Yosef Bar Yehuda, actually it was a different date altogether. And nothing to do with Bet Hillel Bet Shammai. It was actually this. So in other words, once you're rereading the story or you have a different version of the story, then make it a totally new version. And it makes sense according to the first reading to say it was the 1st of Shevat. So it's between the two new years of Bet Shammai, Bet Hillel. According to the second reason, so the whole Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai has nothing to do with it. So then just make it Tu B'Shvat, and that would make more sense. All right, and now we have some last points about this machloket about between Rabban Gamliel and Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna hashtad Amar Rabban Gamliel etrog achad lekitato isuro keyarak Rosh Hashana shelo Tishrei. Okay, regarding this opinion of Rabban Gamliel that etrog is special and is different from different from other fruits, in that we follow its time of its picking, like we would and with vegetables when we come to decide the year of Maaser. So just like you're following vegetables in terms of the point at which it becomes required and it's picking, so too the date of its birthday, of its Rosh Hashanah, is also going to change. And there's not Tu B'Shvat, which it is for other fruits, and but rather Rosh Hashanah of Shelo Tishrei, like vegetables, for the purpose of Ma'aser. Okay, so that's an amazing chidush. I know there's a lot of dials turning because you have to, right, there's a cutoff point for the item itself and for the date during the year. And so Rabba Bar Rav Huna says they have to align. If you're going with vegetables, you got to go with the vegetable all the way. Now we have a challenge to this. Metibe. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omed. Liket etrog erev 15 bishvat. עד שלא תבוא השמש, וחזר וליקט מי שתבוא השמש, אין תורמין ומסרין מזה על זה, לפי שאין תורמין ומסרין לא מן החדש על הישן, ולא מן הישן על החדש. If someone plucked, so liket is an important word, because by saying liket, we already know that we're already in the realm of Rabban Gamliel, who says that, and we're talking about an etrog, and so the time of etrog follows the plucking. That's Rabban Gamliel. And he says, if it's before the 15th of Shvat, so he sees 2 Bishvat that he's talking about, not Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And so the whole law is, if it's before 2 Bishvat, before sunset, and then he takes another etrog a few minutes after sunset, you cannot take maaser from one to the other, because you can't take from the new to the old, and not from last year's produce to this year's produce. So the cutoff is 2 bishvat. Hayta shlishit nechneset l'rebi'it, shlishit maaser rishon u'maaser ani, rebi'it maaser rishon u'maaser sheni. And also, if it happened to be it was a 3rd year, and going into the 4th year, that 2 Bishvat is going to shift from the 3rd year to the 4th year, even though for other things it's for Tishrei, but for fruit, the shift from 3rd year to 4th year happens on 2 Bishvat also. And so then the one that you got before sunset is going to be Maaser Rishon and Maaser Ani, because that's the 3rd year, Maaser Ani. And the one you got after sunset is going to go to the next 4th year, which is also always Maaser Rishon and Maaser Sheni. And so this is a huge question on Rabba Bar Rav Huna's statement, because it's the opposite. Man shemat le de'azil batalikita Rabban Gamliel b'katane shevat. Right? This has to be going with the opinion of Rabban Gamliel, because it's going by the time of picking. It's dogs picking, and you see that's talking about 2 Bishvat and not Rosh Chodesh Tishrei. Rather, we have to reread that statement. Amar Rabba Bar Rav Huna af al gav de Amar Rabban Gamliel etrog achal kita kiyarak. Rosh Hashana shelo shevat. Actually, the opposite of what he said. He says, even though etrog is like vegetables in that you follow the time of its picking, nevertheless, the new year for it follows the same as fruits, which is in Shevat. Okay, good. So we resolve that. And just one point about that same baraita that we should finish off. A previous baraita that we saw above that gave us a very similar case of before sunset and after sunset, talked about the 2nd year entering the 3rd year, and said before sunset it goes the 2nd year, after sunset will follow the 3rd year. But in this baraita that we just quoted, it gave the example of 3rd year going into 4th year. Now both are good examples, because the 3rd year is different from both what comes before it and what comes after it. So it's the same difference. But just curious, why use one example here and then in this etzadog case use 3 and 4? And the answer is to teach us something, by the way, as a tangent. Etrogim are very sensitive to being handled, and they don't do well when people are moving it around. During the sabbatical year, everything is hefked, ownerless, and everybody's coming through and back and forth and picking, and they're handling the etrog tree a lot. And because they handle it so much, it doesn't produce fruit after the sabbatical year, not for another 3 years. And so that's why it couldn't use an example of the 2nd year going into the 3rd year, because etrog tree doesn't grow in the 2nd year after all the abuse that it gets. And it only starts growing in the 3rd year. And that's why it uses the example of 3rd year going into the 4th year. That's the first time when etrogim begin to produce fruit after the Shevi'it year. So we saw that fantastic story of Rabbi Akiva, and we learned a lot about that, of how to deal with machloket when there are different opinions. And the main lesson is pick a lane. Baruch Adonai L'olam, amen ve'amen.